Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. We would like to start now. Thank you for coming, although it's Saturday morning after the Heuriger visit. My name is Ljiljana Radonić. I will chair the panel this morning. And first, I was asked to say a few words about what I do. My project is about World War II in post-socialist, post-communist memorial museums. So I have more the memorial museums approach to the countries you look at. I think that's enough. That's my habilitation project at the Austrian Academy of Sciences. So let me please introduce the panel to you. First we have Rita Horváth. She's a PhD from Bar Ilan University in Ramat Gan in Israel and is a research fellow at the International Institute for Holocaust Research in Yad Vashem. There would be several publications that fit to this topic, but let me just mention the most recent one. It's called Previously Unexplored Sources on the Holocaust in Hungary, which she co-published. Then we have Šárka Sladovníková. She is a literary historian working at the Center for the Study of the Holocaust and Jewish Literature in Prague, and has been working at the Institute of Czech Literature as a bibliographer too. And last but not least, we have Emiliano Perra. He's a senior lecturer in modern European history at the University of Winchester, and one of his recent publications is about conflicts of memory, the reception of Holocaust films and TV programs in Italy, 1945 to the present, published in 2010. So now we will have our hopefully very interesting panel on discourses, narratives, and genres. And I would ask Rita Horváth to start with her presentation on the Holocaust in two early Hungarian TV productions, please.
Thank you very much. Does this work? Strikingly, the first two TV films of the Hungarian television that had ever received prestigious international prizes were both about the Holocaust. Later we will have to qualify this statement, but it will do as a starting point. In 1962, a TV play about Nazi concentration camp inmates entitled Nő a barakban, A Woman in the Barrack, that was directed by Eva Zsuzs, won the Golden Nymph Award in the second Monte Carlo Television Festival. It was aired by the Hungarian TV in 1961. The screenplay was written by Boris Palotai. At the beginning of the published screenplay, and also the film, it is claimed that the screenplay was based on an idea of Roman Gary. Up until now, I haven't found any trace of it in Roman Gary's oeuvre, so I am a bit curious and suspicious about this reference. The other TV film, which is about hiding and trying to pass with false identity papers, is entitled Menekülés a börtönbe, Escape to the Prison. It was written by Ágnes Fedor and Judit Kovács and directed by Imre Mihályfi. It won a prize at the Television Festival at Cannes, also in 1962. Escape to the Prison is the story of an upper middle class, upper class, it's a Jewish woman who needs to go into hiding in Budapest in the winter of 1944-1945. From a family friend, an upper middle class lady, upper class more like, she receives the identity documents of the friend's former maid, who ran away for mysterious reasons just after a short period of service, leaving all her belongings behind. The portrayal of the relationship between the maid and the upper class family seems to be based on Kosztolányi's famous novel, Édes Anna, Sweet Anna. It turned out that the maid, Eszter Horváth, together with a deserter, had killed a 63-year-old farmer while she attempted to hide the deserter. When she was arrested and tried for murder, the protagonist had to choose between certain death, which was to reveal that she was Jewish, or to stick with her false identity and face a possible but not certain death sentence, since in her world, in the world of the Holocaust, for a murderer there could have been mitigating circumstances, while for being a Jew there were none. The play uses this basic historical situation in order to expose unequivocally the utter and traumatic absurdity of the human condition. Then the film becomes the exciting story of how the protagonist tries to find out during her interrogation and subsequent trial, by relying on all sorts of clues, what had actually happened to the maid, to Esther Horváth. A Woman in the Barrack is about a group of political prisoners in a concentration camp. Organized French skilled workers from the center, form the center of the group. They were resistance fighters. Partisans of other nationalities are attached to the group. There is a Polish postal worker, a Hungarian skilled worker from Chapel, and a Polish baker. In addition to the presumably communist organized workers, there is a French poet, Šárka. The frame of the film demonstrates that we learn the entire story from the survivor poet. The events of the film are presented as his memories. This is not the case in the screenplay. There, the frame is missing, and we see directly what has happened in the concentration camp barrack. The story of the film is about the attempt of one of the inmates, Robert, who is played by Ferenc, to invent ways to make the members of the group want to survive and help each other. Robert tries to invent ways to concentrate on the human dignity of the inmates. He is horrified by the disintegration of the group and its members. They fight with one another, steal from one another, sink into madness, and do not even try to keep themselves clean, etc. Robert tries to fight the moral and bodily disintegration by devising games. And finally, he comes up with a role play that a woman acquaintance of his, Louise, came to visit them and would stay with them until liberation, which must be very, very close at hand. Gradually, through various crises, everybody starts to participate in the role play. And it works. The disintegration became reversed. However, the German camp commandant is a psychologist and avowed anti-humanist, for whom it is a mission to crush any humanity in the victims, any remaining humanity. Somehow, he learns about the existence of the fictional woman. It is important from the point of view of the work that we never learn how. If there was an informant, we do not learn about him. There are other inmates in the barrack, more in the screenplay than in the actual film. So the information does not have to come from any of the protagonists. Anyway, the commandant demands the giving up of the fictional woman. He orders Robert to tell the others that they have to let the woman be taken by the guards to an army brothel. So he plays into the game. Then, rather than giving up the woman, by admitting the existence of the fiction, Robert sacrifices himself and he is led away to be executed. His last words are, and I quote, "Boys, I commit Louise to your care, look after her." End of quote. The ending seems a bit naive when we see the commandant defeated by Robert's sacrifice, since even if he does not have the power to crush Robert's spirit, he still has the power to defeat the immediate purpose of it, the survival of the others. He has the power to kill all the members of the group. At first sight, the entire story of this kind of blunt heroism and self-sacrifice for a group seems problematic concerning the concentration camp universe, but for reports of exactly this kind of behavior amongst communists, especially French inmates, it is enough to read actual testimonies of both Jewish and non-Jewish survivors. It is especially illuminating in this respect to read or see Charlotte Delbo's play, Who Will Carry the Word, together with A Woman in the Barrack. Delbo's play was published for the first time in French in 1974. Who Will Carry the World also takes place inside a concentration camp, presumably Auschwitz, where its author, Charlotte Delbo, spent many months. Delbo was a communist resistance fighter, French. She was deported to Auschwitz with more than 200 resistance fighters. The play begins with 22 women who arrive together as political deportees and concludes with only 2 of them left alive. The play is about how these women try to keep one another alive in order to have at least one survivor to testify, to carry the word. Robert Skloot writes about Delbo's play that the individuals find courage and reflected dignity in the companionship of peers. Sorry. A fidelity to goodness and a yearning for freedom. The destruction of the group protagonists in Delbo's play, either by attrition or by sudden multiple termination, creates a moving image of suffering and resistance, whereby anonymity is simultaneously created and transcended by desperate positive behavior, which, though unavailing to survival, validates for the audience a moral world order. The heroic plot of the earlier play of A Woman in the Barrack turns out to be strangely historically quite accurate. Both TV dramas are deeply existentialist. At that time, the entire cultural scene has been saturated through and through by existentialism, art, and philosophy. As Natalie Davis said, that the Danse Macabre pleased the medieval sensitivity, the same way existentialist art pleased the sensibility of the end of the 1950s, beginning of 1960s. Major artists and thinkers tried to make sense of the recent historical events through the existentialist thought system and aesthetics. In fact, the first conclusive attempts to understand the Holocaust as part of human history by works of art and philosophy happened through existentialism, and these 2 Hungarian TV dramas are part of that great international experiment. That is one of the main reasons why they had received the prizes at Cannes and Monte Carlo, I think. The TV dramas also draw upon the existentialist aesthetic values. They are bare and minimalist, yet the emphatic use of light and human features, especially faces, make the images especially beautiful and somewhat unnatural, unrealistic, more like. Dramaturg Gábor Deme and director Eva Zsors defined the genre of TV drama in a report for an international conference as follows. TV drama is a chamber-like dramatic work which primarily draws upon psychological techniques and is transmitted to a small and intimate circle of viewers who are deprived of the collectiveness of the experience. On the TV screen, the human face becomes the focus, and the importance of speech and voice grows as a consequence of that. Therefore, the dramaturgy is defined as much by the voice and the uttered text as by the image. The ideal TV drama depicts an intense conflict between just a few people during a short period of time in just a few places and as part of a plot containing not too many turning points. In other words, a TV drama is a live broadcast from the depths of the psyche. End of quote. Both TV dramas conform to the above definition, which help them to focus on the individual. Escape to the Prison is a surprisingly complex work, though. Many important social issues and relationships emerge on the side. Even feminist concerns surface, as we have 3 women of very different backgrounds who all rebel against the accepted world order in their own way. The maid tries to save a deserter. The upper-class lady becomes a righteous among the nations. And the protagonist, whom this world aims at eliminating, struggles to remain alive. A Woman in the Barrack thinks through the interrelated topics of heroism and sacrifice. Both are favorite existentialist topics. Interestingly, the screenplay is a more complex exploration of these themes than the actual film. In the screenplay, Robert's self-sacrifice for the community becomes necessary not only because of the Nazi commandant, but because it was preceded by an individual sacrifice. A father sacrifices himself for his son, and his message to his son is that he should care only about himself in order to survive. Robert claims that one needs to think about everybody in order to survive, and has to demonstrate that individual sacrifices do not work. Sacrifices are redemptive only for the community. Both A Woman in the Barrack and The Escape to the Prison are about the Holocaust, but as TV productions of the beginning of the 1960s in communist socialist Hungary, they did not dwell on the Jewish aspects and or significance of it. Both films deal with communist subject matters as well, and talk about the resistance of working class people. The films are mainly interested in the historical trauma of the Holocaust in existential terms, as a final proof of the inherent absurdity of the human condition. Escape to the Prison emphasizes that the film's persecuted protagonist is a member of the upper classes, only half Jewish, and was raised as a Christian. She is marginal as a Jew, but not marginal as a victim of the Holocaust. Only her father is Jewish. Her mother voluntarily went into the ghetto and was deported together with her father, another self-sacrifice. Clary, the protagonist, when she formulates her tragic choice, she formulates it as a choice between confessing the identity of her father or confessing a murder. The logical choice is that in that absurd world is obviously the confession of murder and not of innocence. The title, Escape to the Prison, is a paradox as normally one escapes from prison, of course. However, real aspects of the Jewish experiences in the Holocaust seep into both TV dramas, which must have been obvious for the contemporaries. The Jewish survivors amongst the creators of the film made sure that these elements are there, sometimes I think even despite of their own intentions. A characteristic example of this, for instance, is the fact that Clary received help with the false identity papers from an old family friend, precisely because her mother was not Jewish, and she was brought up as a Christian. The anti-Semite lady, who did not know about the Jewish aspect of Clary's personal history, would not have helped her as a Jew. The opening scene of the film, that consists of disturbing sound images, is also strangely realistic and unrealistic at the same time, and symbolic. We hear the loud and monotone sound of the forcedly firm steps of a Jew who has no aim, nowhere to go, nowhere to turn in the winter of 1944-1945. The steps reverberate hauntingly in the empty street. From the point of view of the Jewish experience of the Holocaust, A Woman in the Barrack is even more problematic. None of the protagonists are Jewish, and in the screenplay, Robert even motivates Juhász, the skilled worker from Czech, from Hungary, with an anti-Semitic statement telling him that he should put himself together because he is an organized worker, a political prisoner, and not a criminal or a Jew. His actual words are, "You are not taken here as a consequence of stealing a coat or because of your nose." This sentence is in the published screenplay, but it is not in the film. It was too much, I think. Not in the text of the play, but visually, the Jewish Holocaust is also present in the TV play in the form of visual conventions, which, in my opinion, have to do with actual photos and film footages about the camps taken during and after liberation. These visual conventions then have informed later productions about the Jewish Holocaust. And I would like to ask you to watch this excerpt, which is very near from the beginning, when the protagonist announces that he hears bombing, and so liberation is near.
That was it? No. Again.
Yeah, please. Just watch. This is it. But I really want to know what you think about the visual aspect of this image, for example. And this visual connection to the Jewish experience of the Holocaust work, even though the faces and the individual mannerisms of the chosen actors could have worked against that. But it didn't. A Woman in the Barrack is literally about an absence turned into presence. I claim that both TV films speak about the Jewish Holocaust in an indirect way. The Jewish Holocaust is present precisely as it is absent. And this phenomenon of the omnipresence of the Jewish Holocaust as an absence seems to be one of the characteristic features of existentialist literature of the late 1950s, early 1960s, as Shoshana Fellman's famous analysis of Albert Camus' The Fall demonstrates. She claims that Camus' The Fall, for example, places the Holocaust, Amsterdam's empty Jewish quarter, in its center, a center of both avoidance and encounter. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Rita, for your thorough analysis of the two films and also for keeping the time. Thank you. The next two presenters who are on the program, as you have mentioned, noticed, presented yesterday because there was a slot in the program. So this presentation was moved to Friday by Nevena Dakovic and Alexandra Milovanovic. The colleague is here still if you have some further questions. But we will now go on with the presentation about visualizing Holocaust in representative Czechoslovak and Czech literature, Czech feature and TV films. Please, sir.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's proceed. First film with the topic about the Holocaust in Czechoslovakia emerged only 3 years after the Second World War. It was in 1948. And the name of the film was Long Journey, and the director was Alfred Radok. Unfortunately, this year was also the year of communist takeover in Czechoslovakia. Fate of Radok's film prefigured the attitude of Communist Party towards the film with this topic. As Radok's film didn't respond to the ideological requirements of new regime, it didn't have official premiere, it could not be screened in big cities. For long years, the film had to wait in the safe for the change of political climate, which came more than 10 years ago. Well, it will be pretty hard, I'll try. I thought I was already going more slowly than usual. Okay, thank you, I'll try. Another film with the Holocaust topic was shot in 1959. It was Romeo, Juliet and Darkness, made by Jiří Weiss. Although shot at the end of the 50s, the film belongs to the era of so-called New Wave in the 1960s. During this decade, 14 films about Holocaust were made, as you may see in the table. This was possible thanks to the melting of the regime in the second half of the 50s and in the 60s. During this decade, 14 films about Holocaust were made. And also, many of them, I think all of them, are the high quality and they remain the first-rank films of Czechoslovak cinematography. Many of them also contain hidden protest dealing with the Stalinist and post-Stalinist rule. After the occupation of Warsaw-backed army in August of 1968, the topic of Jews and Holocaust was suppressed again. During the 70s and 80s, only 3 films with this topic were made. And 2 of these were based on short stories written by Ota Pavel. Both were shot by director Karol Kachyňa. After the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia in 1989, the topic of Jews and Holocaust became popular again, and the wave of this popularity of the topic lasts till these days. Out of all 32 Czech films with this topic, only 5 of them are TV films. Today I will speak about 6 films. 3 of them are TV films, 3 of them are feature films. All of them are based on novellas written by Czech authors. As you can see, films were usually made only a little time after the books were written. For example, Romeo, Juliet and Darkness, a novella written by Jan Odčenášek in 1958, was made into a film in the very same year by the director Eva Sladková. Unfortunately, this film was not archived in the archives of Czech Republic, so it's not accessible. A year later, Jiří Weiss made his very famous adaptation. Third adaptation was made in 1997 by Karel Smyček. This is the TV film. Arnošt Lustig was a survivor of Holocaust who wrote about this topic for the rest of his life. He wrote many books about this topic. Some of them were narrated by women. In 1963, he wrote Prayer for Catherine Horowitz. 4 years later, he wrote Dita Sachs. Both are narrated by women and Holocausts. One of them is a Holocaust survivor, another is not. Both of these novellas were filmed by Antonín Moskalik, one in 1965, and one 2 years later, as you may see. At the beginning of the 70s, Ota Pavel wrote short stories about his childhood. It was his therapy for his mental illness. Karel Kachyňa made 2 films based on these stories. Gold Eels were made in 1979 and Forbidden Dreams in 1986. Novella Romeo, Juliet and Darkness is a tragic love story of 2 young people in the time of assassination of Reichsprotector Reinhard Heydrich in 1942. Pavel meets Esther on the bench of the park and finds out that she didn't board the transport to Theresienstadt. He offers her shelter in a house he lives in, and he keeps hiding of Esther's secret from his family. Both young people fall in love and they plan future together. Although he is protecting Esther from hearing information from radio about the martial law and killings, she hears about martial law one day from the radio, and she is scared that her beloved Pavel and his family might be endangered by hiding her. Therefore, she runs out of the house where she is shot by Nazis. In contrary to the novella, which concentrates on the love story of 2 young people, Weiss's film focuses on much more. Film depicts human fear and how different people cope with it. It was a very common topic represented in the films of 1960s, the fear of people. Everybody is terrified. The fear is even more intensified after the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich and the declaration of martial law. In one scene, camera shoots Pavel and his mother looking through a barred window, and as the camera is shooting them from outside the flat, it actually seems that it looks that they are in a prison. This film tries to avoid black and white vision of the world. For example, there is this character, Kubiasova. She is a lover of a Nazi, so she's a collaborator. And actually, she moves in a flat, to a Jewish flat that was abandoned only 10 minutes before that because the Jews had to board to the transport. Anyway, she still is an ambivalent character because, for example, when she finds out that Pavel is hiding somebody, she doesn't go immediately to the police or to her Nazi lover, but she tells Pavel's mother first. Most prototypic positive character, of course, is the Jewish girl Hanka. In the book, her name is Esther. The topic of the Holocaust is here portrayed in the Jewish family of Worms. At the beginning of the film, they are departing from their flat, as I said before. They put their belongings on a cart, and they leave through a silent, deserted street, very usual stereotype. A little Jewish daughter asks her parents childlike questions such as how long the train will be that they are going to board, or if there are going to be any children or any toys. This naivety and innocence of little girl is used as a contrast to the absurd reality. The Jewish family is also stereotypically portrayed defensive, timid, and reconciled with their fate. On the other hand, there is Hanka, who is representing defense and resistance because she didn't board to transport to Theresienstadt. Adaptation of Karel Smyček, made almost 40 years later, sticks more to the book original and focuses strictly on the individual drama of these 2 lovers. The Jewishness and Holocaust is portrayed in the character of Esther. Unlike in the adaptation from 1959, this this adaptation emphasizes her Jewishness, which is also visible from her name, because, as I said before, now the name of her is Esther, as it is in the book, but the girl in the 60s, her name was Hanka, which, according to Weiss, was because he wanted to emphasize the general validity of the film. Also, her Jewishness is not sidelined. It is more emphasized, as well as her sexuality and, for example, sexual intercourse between both lovers. Such scene would be unimaginable in film with such topic in 1960s. But in the films made since 1989, this scene are pretty common in films with this topic. We also have a collaborator, Rejsek, whose son, a Czech son, serves in a German army. What is interesting in Czech context is the topic of Christianity. For example, a painter tells Pavel that his head resembles the head of Jesus Christ, and also his mother is a strongly believing Christian who attends the masses frequently. Well, as well as the Czech Republic is well known for being atheistic, this is something that isn't portrayed very often in Czech cinematography. Here's some pictures from the movie. The first two are from the first adaptation, 1959. The other two are from the adaptation of 1997. First and third pictures are the lovers. Okay. Prayer for Catherine Horowitz narrates different Holocaust story than is usually portrayed, because the film doesn't portray physical violence, yet the atmosphere is tense. In the character of Nazi officer Bedřich Brenské is depicted psychological violence. His psychological manipulation and emotional blackmail calculates with human fear and desire to spare one's life. The beginning and the end of the film are inspired by two real events. First, film narrates the story of a group of Jewish businessmen with American origins who were captured by the Nazis in Italy in 1943. Nazi officer Brenské offers the Jews that Nazis are willing to exchange them for their own captured German officers under the condition that American Jews will pay all the expenses. When arranging the deal inside a room, Jewish men hear shouting woman from outside who is begging for life. Cohen, the group's representative, asks Brenské if this strange lady could be added to their group, and Brenské agrees. Subsequently, Jews ride in a train towards Hamburg, where they are supposed to board on a ship Deutschland that should take them to the safety. During the ride, Brenské convinces them to pay even more money, and he also claims that the authorities don't want to add Catherine to the passport of Mr. Cohen because they are not married. Mr. Cohen tries to persuade his friends to return to the concentration camp. After a dramatic discussion about fear and morality and ethics, these businessmen agree. The wedding is performed in concentration camp by Rabbi Datum, who sings Kaddish for Catherine during the wedding. This prayer for the dead is an eloquent indication of the Jewish faith in this film. After the wedding, Jews ride to the port of Hamburg, where they can see the actual ship. Brenské demands more money, otherwise the ship can't go. As they don't have any left, he wants money from their relatives. When they don't pay any, he proposes that they will get out of the Reich on the train through the borders of Switzerland. But according to him, Switzerland requires disinfection, so they have to go to the concentration camp again. Back in the concentration camp, in a collective locker room, everybody should undress, and they should go through this supposed disinfection. Men start to undress, but Catherine hesitates. One officer demands that she should undress, and he humiliates her. Therefore, she slowly undresses, and as she slowly takes off her bra, she slowly proceeds towards the officer. Then she actually whips him with the bra, takes his gun, and shoots him. Afterwards, of course, Nazis shoot all of them. Episode of a young girl shooting a German officer before going to the gas chamber is the second real event I mentioned. Unnamed young girl shot officer Horst Schillinger. This event has been described in many stories. As I mentioned before, Brenské represents a very different type of Nazi. He is sophisticated, and he uses mental and verbal manipulation as a type of psychological violence. In the contrast to him stands an officer who is shot by Catherine at the end of the film. He is stupid, kind of a country bumpkin. He also represents physical violence because he shoots one Jew from the group, Mr. Rappaport. Holocaust is also present in very specific words used by Bedřich Brenský, such as final solution. Jewish men in the concentration camp are portrayed as obedient men, of course, and Rabbi Dayan of Lodz, self-proclaimed lord in the hair drying room, also represents mental illness and madness caused by the reality of concentration camps. This film also presents resistance. The Jewish resistance speaks in the character of Rappaport, who questions the whole deal between them and the Nazis. He asks about the smoking chimneys, and he shouts at them that the Germans will be hanged. Afterwards, he is shot. Catherine is an active young Jewish woman. At the beginning, she shouts for her life. Later in the train, she is aware that they have to do something against the Nazis, otherwise they will do what they want with them, which of course happens in the end. Well, although everybody gets killed, at least she fought for her life and her dignity. Central topic of the film is moral responsibility, which is a frequent topic in the films narrating the Holocaust. Here's some. In the first picture, you may see the beautiful Catherine Horváth. On the second picture, there is the Nazi Bedřich Brenský. The third one is the Rabbi Dayan from Lodz. And the last one is from the locker room. Dita Sax takes place after the Second World War in 1947 and narrates a story of a Holocaust survivor. A beautiful young girl lives in a Jewish orphanage and tries to start new life after everybody dear to her is dead. She struggles with new life. She feels lonely, both happy and unhappy, and her search for the meaning of life and her attempt to find a place in society are in vain. Unable to go on, she commits a suicide. Therefore, Dita Sax is a story about a girl who survived the war but didn't survive the peace. The film portrays several topics related to the Holocaust. Former friend of Dita's uncle returns half of the gold foils that her uncle left at his friend's before the war. This man keeps half of the golden foils as a satisfaction for his trouble. So he represents the vulturism of people who took advantage of the Jews during or before the Second World War. Other mentioned topic is post-war anti-Semitism or desire of survivors to have children after the Holocaust. In the film, there is also present topic randomly depicted in Czech films. This is the topic of humor, precisely, black humor. For example, when Dita's friend is browsing through a magazine, Dita draws his attention to the hilarious advertisements on Cyclone B, the great insect killer. Also, when Dita's friend leaves to London by train, one of the Jewish orphans draws letters RU, which are short for the Rückkehr unerwünscht. Everybody in the scene looks at that, and then everybody laughs and they clap their hands. And this is the beautiful young Dita Sax. Gold Eels are based on autobiographical stories written by Ota Pavel, as I mentioned before. This film was made in 1979 and is narrated from a perspective of Ota Pavel, the youngest son, a 10-year-old boy. He is forced to grow up during the Second World War. He is forced to take care of her mother because his older brothers and the father have to leave with the transport to concentration camp. Nazis are represented as brutal ignorance and self-indulgent animals who feast on the carbs from Arani's point. In the fantasy of the little boy, they are the deaf. In one daydream, he sees a German plane that comes over his beloved home, and the Germans in the mask of death will throw bombs on their home. Then there is a short scene of mother running out of the house, where she can see her beloved children lying in the river in the position of crucified, dead. A topic of the Holocaust is a peripheral in here and is portrayed only in one scene when father and brothers leave for transport, with, of course, with the Jewish stars on their coats. Unlike other films, Gold Eels portray Czech people as helpful and not cowards, for example, and films from 60s usually portray Czech people as cowards when coacting with Jews. For example, when Otto fishes carps illegally for him and his mother, Walter Bailiff catches him, but instead of beating him, he asks him to shout as if he was beaten, and he beats his leather bag. Moreover, he advises Otto where he can fish safely without being scared that anybody would see him. This is the young Otto. Forbidden Dreams were shot 7 years later, and they also narrate the stories from Otto Pavel's childhood, but from the perspective of the father. As a typical Jew, he is a good businessman. Yeah, this is not a stereotype, but an autobiographic remark. Another stereotype is that of a Jewish sensuality, as his sexuality is accented. As the main perspective is adult, the topic of the Holocaust is more present in the film. Father's bond is Aryanized, he has to wear a Jewish star, and he has to work in the factory. Both parents stand in distinct contrast. Mother is a Christian, obedient and passive, whereas father is a peddler and unfaithful man. On the other hand, he is courageous because he unsews his star and he goes to a river to fish for his sons before they have to leave for the transport. He is convinced that they need to strengthen themselves to survive the concentration camps. For them, he also poaches the deer. As in other films, Nazis are again represented as arrogant people, and Czech people are again represented as cowards, but also as helpful. Interestingly, the same character of former spy Rozvědčík is portrayed differently in both films. They were directed by the same director, but Rozvědčík is one in The Gold Eels. He is a hero. On the other hand, in Forbidden Dreams, he is a coward. Now I will move to the conclusion. Depiction of Jewishness, of course, changed through the decades in Czechoslovakia, in the films of Czechoslovakia and Czech Republic. Generally, films made before 1989 suppressed the topic of Jewishness, also in accordance with the anti-Zionic orientation of Soviet Union. For example, Antonín Moskalik, the director of Dita Sax and Kateřina Horowitz, in one interview said that Dita Sax is a film not about Jews, but about all people. Main characters in the films made in the 60s solve ethical dilemmas and are confronted with evil. Important topic is evil in a human being represented by common, ordinary citizen. Other topics are, for example, justice or willingness and unwillingness to compromises. Paralyzing fear is central topic of a couple of films, as I said before, in the Romeo, Juliet and Darkness from 1959. In fact, Jiří Weiss, the director of Romeo, Juliet and Darkness, depicted human fear of Czech people so distinctively that he had to change the final scene repeatedly so that the share of common people on the death of Hanka would not be so striking. He was actually told by the government that he had to make this scene more better looking for Czech people. In the 90s, there were made only 5 films, 3 of them made in co-production with other countries. In contrast with older films, these contain more historical information because filmmakers were aware of the time gap between the history and the present and of the lack of knowledge of the spectators. Also, Holocaust becomes central topic of many of these films. It is no more suppressed. Yet in the films after 2000, Holocaust sometimes seems to be just a necessary, attractive set piece of a story which is taking place during the Second World War. In Czech history, a very important event of the Second World War is the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich, subsequent martial law and destruction of town Lidice. This topic is mentioned in 4 films I talked about today, and in a couple of others, actually, but in all of them that are narrating the topics of Second World War. Jewishness and Holocaust are not surprisingly often portrayed in stereotypes. If the film story starts before the war, a natural thing is to depiction the happy childhood in pre-war Czechoslovakia. Jews are almost always portrayed as positive characters and Nazis as negative characters. There are some exceptions in some films from the 60s, such as in Transport from Paradise made by Zbigněk Břinych, where we can find both a character of a negative Jew and an ambivalent Nazi, while not a positive one, of course. Interesting are strong female characters in Czechoslovak and Czech films, as you could see from my lecture. In Dita Sax, Kateřina Horowitz, also Esther or Hanka, in both films and in many others, there are very strong characters. Holocaust is often reduced to a scene of a group of Jews leaving with transport with the Stars of David on their coats. This is this attractive set piece in the films narrating the story of Second World War. The topic of the Holocaust really sometimes is reduced only to this one scene. Yet, sometimes the topic is represented more originally. For example, Father Popper in Forbidden Dreams boasts that he would knock out Adolf Hitler. He uses sports terminology, which is used in many other films too. In a Romeo, Juliet and Darkness adaptation made in 1997, we've got a metaphor of game of life. Board game Ludo, or in German Mensch ärgere dich nicht, is here used as this metaphor. Pavel wants Esther to play with him. She refuses at first, then she says that if she rolls 6 on dice, she would die. As I mentioned before, some of these films also contain humor. Interestingly, the humor is more present in the films in the 60s and not in the films made since 1989. Sadly, almost all Jewish resistance portrayed in almost all of the films is suppressed by death, usually. The topic of the Holocaust is still very popular by the filmmakers in Czech Republic. Yet contemporary films have to face several dangers, I think. As the time gap between the history and between the present is getting bigger, filmmakers include more historic information in the films, and they have the power to manipulate the facts. Contemporary mass media present violence on a daily basis. And as the audience gets more used to it, their resistance threshold is kind of increasing. As a consequence, new films might be even more explicit and naturalistic, but also superficial. The question is if such future films won't manipulate the spectator and change the perception of history and our cultural memory. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Šárka, for your presentation, which first of all reminded us on how vivid the Czechoslovak film production was as a whole in the first step, and then in the second on how central the World War II and the Holocaust issues were in Czechoslovakia. Thank you. Before we go on, I might mention that we are being a bit air-conditioned here at the front, so maybe in a rather freezing way, so maybe someone here could do something about it before we are not able to speak anymore. Thank you. Okay, so we will now go on with Emiliano Perra, and he will tell us something about the reception of Unsere Mütter, Unsere Väter, or Generation War, as it is called in English, in Germany, France, Britain, and Italy. Please.
Something very recent. In fact, Generation War is the most recent and perhaps the most ambitious blockbuster miniseries set during the Second World War, produced by the German company Teamworks. The miniseries garnered a broad international audience and generated significant and at times intense public debates. So this paper will discuss Generation War from 2 points of view. In the first part, I will situate the miniseries alongside other productions, Teamworks productions like Dresden, 2006, and Die Flucht, 2007. And these products partake in in a growing subgenre that I will define as the telenovelization of World War II and the Holocaust. The second part of the paper will take the lead from the fact that the relationship between these narratives and historical accuracy is far from unproblematic and can lead to occasionally uncomfortable public debates, especially in the case of transnational receptions. I will thus discuss the debates generated by Generation War in France, Britain, and Italy. The original plan was to also talk about Germany, but then obviously I had to be very selective. And so in particular, I will discuss the rather country-specific discussions of the miniseries presentation of innocence, guilt, and victimhood, and the related implications for post-war Germany. In this, I will argue that beneath this cosmopolitan veneer, historical consciousness of World War II and the Holocaust is still predominantly inflected in national terms and can still be divisive. So both these themes come together to argue that the telenovelization of World War II and the Holocaust, whilst perhaps engaging a wider audience in narratives of the past, doesn't ultimately create a transnational consensus, let alone cosmopolitan memory. So first part is the Holocaust as a telenovela. And I'll start by referencing an article that was published by József Olositsky in 2004, in which she sketched a mini canon of visual representations of the Holocaust by using 3 films as a representative of 3 macro genres. The first one was Shoah as for tragedy, then Schindler's List for epic historical drama, and then Life is Beautiful for comedy. one might not necessarily agree with their taxonomy of films, but if we want to follow that, I would argue that a fourth mode should be added to this trilogy, especially when including television and recent television programs in the analysis, which is the Holocaust as telenovela. In the context of this paper, I will define telenovelas based upon Laura Mumford's explanation as, and a quote from her, fictional dramatic television programs presented in multiple installments through a narrative composed of interlocking storylines that focus on the relationship within a specific community of characters. End of quote. Moreover, telenovela characters are and stories share some key features, such as the need to get ahead, the ups and downs of romance, extremely important role of romance in this type of narratives, the complex emotions that family life stirs up. In the context of this paper, terming Generation War and the like as more specifically telenovelas rather than soap operas is a more appropriate term for three reasons. The first one is that the seriality of telenovelas is enclosed within a narrative arch that has a beginning and an end, while soap operas are notoriously open-ended, often stretching over the years and decades. Living in Britain, there's one that is called, a radio one that is called The Archers, that started sometime in the early 50s and it still goes on. Secondly, in the regional context, telenovelas are a way through which mass culture approaches important themes, including history, while soap operas are predominantly set in the present. Finally, telenovelas deal with traditional themes of love, rivalry, passion, and envy through a degree of engagement with social, cultural, and class divisions, whereas Anglo-American or soap operas tend to be set in homogeneously kind of upper middle class social milieus. So the programs that discussed in this paper share a certain number of features with the telenovela genre. A key one is that they filter tragic historical events such as the Holocaust and the horrors of World War II more in general through conventional stories of love, betrayal, and so forth. And they are often dismissed for this reason by critics and scholars. However, as far as I'm concerned, the problem is not so much emotionality per se, but the narratives that this emotional involvement serve, or the way they are perceived to serve. In order to explore these narratives and some of their implications, I will very briefly discuss Dresden and Die Flucht and Generation War. We're all familiar with the fact that in the last 15 years, a number of successful German productions have been produced that deal with German suffering during the war through situations such as devastation of Dresden and the flight of ethnic Germans from Eastern Europe following Soviet expansion. If we look at Die Flucht, Tim Bergefell has compared Die Flucht to Gone with the Wind, because he says that just like Scarlett in Gone with the Wind, Lena is a rebellious daughter who proves to be a resourceful defender of her family in times of crisis, by returning to and running their East Prussian estate. Through a love affair with a French prisoner of war, Lena proves herself to be in opposition both to the old Junkers elite and to the new Nazi elite. And so she is kind of independent also politically because of that. I would argue that these are the elements of telenovela, in particular Lena's courageous love set against social constraints and her defense of the family. Not surprisingly, critics dismissed Die Flucht as an inconsequential soap opera. Okay. The previous year, so in 2006, Teamworks had produced another hugely successful miniseries, Dresden, and it's the story, probably most of you are familiar with it, it's the story of surgeon Alexander and his fiancée Anna, nurse in the hospital run by her father. Anna falls in love with Robert, who's a British bomber pilot who's been shot down, and they have a baby together. Their relationship and the British baby reconciliation child, as we can call it, they conceive together clearly symbolize the new post-war future for Germany. So it's a message for current viewers. So both Dresden and Die Flucht offer a feminization of German storytelling. They focus on female protagonists because it's easier to represent victimhood through someone who did not bear arms. By telling stories of women who, with their transnational love and passion, they counter official Nazi policy, this miniseries project an image of contemporary Germans as peace-loving Europeans or cosmopolitan citizens of the world. And this might be achieved sometimes, especially in the case of probably Dresden, overly didactic demonstrations of political correctness. But these miniseries express a form of nostalgia that suits the third generation's concern with exploration of a past that they obviously never experienced. So this reappropriation of German wartime suffering is possible precisely because Germany, as we all know, has gone through a thorough process of commemoration of the Holocaust, even though with some problems with dealing with the figure of the perpetrator, as Steiner highlighted in his keynote. So Generation War deploys love stories with a similar narrative function. Here, the love stories are not transnational, but they equally rip apart Nazi ideology. This is clearly the case of the, most of you are familiar with it because it was hugely successful. It's the case of the love between the Aryan, Greta, and the Jew, Victor, two of the young, the 5 young protagonists. Other elements of the novella are exemplified by the mutual but unspoken love between Wilhelm and Charlotte, two of the other characters. So after 4 years on the Eastern Front, Wilhelm as a Wehrmacht officer and Charlotte as a nurse, the two meet again in Berlin, scarred but ready to start again a new life in a new Germany. They are then joined by Victor, the Jew. However, he's not joined by Greta, who had become a radio star in Germany, but was killed by the regime towards the end of the war. So this is one, in a way, extraordinary result of this generational fresco, that of all the 5 friends, the one whose war experience is least marked by German brutality is Victor, the Jew, because he escapes and then he joins the Polish partisans and things happen. As I will discuss in a minute, the fact that most of his problems were caused by Polish anti-Semitic partisans was one of the most jarring features of the miniseries that reviewers internationally picked up on. For now, I would just like to end this first part by saying that the adoption of themes and codes from telenovela and television's representations of World War II and the Holocaust is a recurrent and increasing phenomenon. This is something that in another paper could be explored in a transnational context by looking at other series like Un village français in France or Il peccato e la vergogna in Italy, series of very different quality but that share some structural features. So telenovela not only offers feasible ways to represent an extreme event such as the Holocaust to a wide audience, but it also makes possible for countries with a checker, a tainted history, to tell stories centering on their own victimhood. So with Dresden and Die Flucht, we're still within, in a way, the boundaries of a narrative that might be schmaltzy for some, but were not perceived as revisionist, if one looks at internationally the reception. However, there's no one-size-fits-all assessment of this phenomenon, and as this next section will show, an international review of Generation War and the reception of the Reception War shows that somehow a line might have been crossed in the case of this latter product. So let's look at the reception of Generation War. Obviously, provide a detailed reconstruction of the international reception of the Generation War is way beyond the scope of this paper. Here, I would only like to sketch a couple of lines of inquiry. The first element to note is that, unsurprisingly, the cross-national reception of the miniseries is complex and cannot be synthesized in clear-cut lines. So whilst, and again, I'm overgeneralizing, the German reception can be read along broad political lines with the conservative press, in general terms, more positive than the liberal press. The same is not true of the other countries, including in this research. For example, if we look at Britain, we see that the Daily Mail, conservative, very conservative, praised it as much as the politically neutral Radio Times, and 2 out of 3 reviews in the liberal Guardian. The gist of these positive reviews is that the miniseries makes international viewers imagine what it felt like to be a Nazi, and shows how the characters compromise and lose their innocence in the war. For this reason, it's bold, brave, and sensitive, and this type of praise, again, across the political spectrum. Just like praise comes from across the political spectrum, the same happens with criticism. Again, if we look at Britain, British commentators on the left and on the right took issue with the representation of the Friends as untainted by Nazi ideology in 1941, and by the representation of the real Nazis as separate, other from the miniseries characters. And we find this point, which echoed the one made in the German press by Ulrich Herbert in an important article about Generation War, but also in the conservative Spectator and Daily Telegraph. So similar and not immediately obvious political, cultural fault lines can be found in Italy and France as well. So the reception of Generation War was not determined by political views of reviewers, not necessarily. So we need to look at something else. So one of the main areas of criticism was about the miniseries' selective representation of history, unsurprisingly. This umbrella category included, first, the representation of these young men and women as free from Nazi influence. Second, the miniseries' approach to anti-Semitism. Third, the representation of non-Germans, Poles, Ukrainians, and one American. And fourth, an important point, the broader message of the miniseries that for many of these commentators, the message was that it wasn't years of Nazism that contaminated our mothers and fathers, but war. So let's look at this point a little more in detail. The first one, that the main characters in Generation War are immune from Nazi propaganda despite 8 years of regime is made clear from the outset. They listen to jazz music, and one of them is Jewish, as I already said. So reviewers took issue with the fact that the 5 characters are attractive, good guys, misled by the real Nazis, who are physically presented as physically ugly and never developed as characters. Reviewers criticized the miniseries for answering the question of how much did Germans know or approve of Nazi policy with a clear not much. And this despite the fact that at least one of them had taken part in the invasion of Poland and France, and as stated in the miniseries, so probably he had already seen his fair share of war crimes. The French and Italian online magazines Aswift.com and Minimamorale.it defined the representation as intellectually dishonest. The characters only react to what happens from 1941 onwards, as if there was nothing worth saying about the previous 8 years spent by them whilst exposed to Nazism. Moreover, the Italian cultural magazine Studio pointed out that the entire context around the main characters in Germany, while still in Germany, is kind of rose-tinted. The Gestapo officer that inquires about the jazz record is not exactly threatening, and the 5 friends kind of get away with it quite easily. They can greet Victor with a loud shalom on the streets, and neither they nor Victor seem to bother by it, and this is Berlin in 1941. So this is the first point. The second one leads me to the second major criticism of the series on mini-series on historical grounds. Took issue with the fact that the most vicious anti-Semitism comes from non-Germans, and so not just Ukrainian collaborators, but also Polish resistance fighters are staunch anti-Semites. In one of the most widely talked about scenes, Polish partisans refused to liberate a trainload of Jews, pushing Victor to refused to liberate them, and so therefore refused to obey, exposing himself as a Jew, and then he has to leave the group, the partisan unit, as a result of that. That scene has provoked official protests from Poland, in Germany, but also in Britain. The weeks prior to the broadcast in Britain saw protests outside the BBC, and an official request from the embassy to follow up the broadcast with a more accurate documentary on World War II, or at least an in-studio debate. And BBC agreed to the latter request. And the last episode was followed by a pre-recorded debate titled Generation War, Fact and Fiction, involving historians David Cesarani, Eva Hoffman, Richard Evans, series producer Benjamin Benedict, to defend the program. He probably had an unpleasant 30 minutes in that program. And an interview with the Polish ambassador, Witold Sobkow, who commented on the unfair treatment of Poles in the miniseries, in the scene that I just described. Perhaps surprisingly, Sobkow, the ambassador, did not dwell on another scene that, seen by some commentators, as even more disturbing. In a miniseries that leaves the Holocaust on the background, the practice of searching corpses for valuables and extract gold teeth is not carried out by Germans on their victims, but by Polish partisans on German fallen soldiers. And to be fair, Poles are not the only non-Germans to be present in a very unfavorable light, which brings me very briefly to the third point, the third main criticism of the representation, which is the representation of non-Germans. Ukrainian auxiliaries are brutal enough to shock our German friends. And the Russians are, of course, rapists, and the only American we see at the end is a cynic who knowingly employs a former Gestapo officer after the war. And this is something that was noted by Ian Borum in the New York Review of Books, and then his review was referenced by many other reviews that I analyzed for this paper. And the fact that the truly Nazi Germans are physically unattractive psychopaths, and that the worst manifestation of anti-Semitism comes from Poles and Ukrainians, doesn't mean that our mothers and fathers are entirely innocent. No reviewers, even the more critical ones, claimed that. So there was a level of acknowledgement that there was something important said by this miniseries. And this brings me to the fourth major criticism, that the main characters were victims of war, not of Nazism. The protagonists lose their innocence and are brutalized by war, leading them to betray Jews and commit war crimes, including using Soviet civilians to test minefields. One of the main factors that help explain the reception of the miniseries is precisely what commentators made of this fact. The more positive ones saw courage in this acknowledgement. Our mothers and fathers did horrible things during the war, even if they were not dyed-in-the-wool Nazis. Negative reviews interpreted Generation War differently and faulted it accordingly. So this is a key point if you want to understand the reception. So this second group of reviews, the more negative ones, were in some cases incensed by the narrative implicitly stating that the humanity of our protagonists, untouched by 8 years of Nazism, was tainted only by the war. The big message that many reviewers saw was thus that war is senseless and corrosive, and it engulfs everyone. It's a message spelled out clearly by Friedel, the more thoughtful of these five friends, and repeated quite a few times in the series, in the miniseries, when he claims that the war brings out the worst in people. Many took issue with the fact that a German miniseries on the war of extermination waged in the Soviet Union might not necessarily be the best, the most appropriate place for these humanistic anti-war messages, and it was a point made by in the Jewish American magazine Tablet, and then again referenced in a number of reviews in the countries that I'm looking at. So moreover, the character's lack of real agency is problematic. As noted, particularly in Italy, a danger that comes with this representation is a sort of moral relativism in which all are equally victims of war. Historian Vanessa Roghi has argued that the result of this image of universal pacifism is to do away with the need to keep at the forefront of German self-perception the issue of historical responsibility. It's not insignificant that this criticism was particularly pronounced in Italy, and it illustrates the importance of looking at country-specific receptions, because cultural products are obviously not received in a vacuum. The type of narrative presented by Generation War appeared to some commentators in Italy as being consistent with other, more decidedly revisionist narratives that have dominated Italian debates about World War II in the last decades. To be fair, Roghi's fear in the Italian context is not without reason. The official Italian bishop's newspaper, called Avvenire, praised the Generation War for showing that millions of young people on all sides were slaughtered by slaughtering other young people in a desperate folly, as they defined it, thus really reducing World War II to little more than a depoliticized outburst of madness. So in this last discussion lies one of the key reasons explaining the reception of Generation War outside of Germany. Criticism of the miniseries on historical ground were certainly about history, and that goes without saying. However, more present concerns also emerge. Why this miniseries now? What does it mean for contemporary German to perceive their mothers and fathers in these terms now? So reviewers' responses to these questions influence their assessment of the entire miniseries. In this, we see a combination of factors that tell us as much about the reception of the miniseries as about deeply ingrained or more recent anxieties linked to the role of Germany. In this context, we go from the kind of knee-jerk reaction of the conservative British magazine The Spectator, which saw in the miniseries ambiguity, a disheartening sign of that Germany is failing to understand its past and is thus doomed to repeat it, which is something that clearly is appealing for British conservative readers, to more thoughtful reflections. In one, a review in The Guardian deemed watching Generation War a useful exercise, if anything, partly to think about whether the stories the British tell themselves about their own past are any less dubious. And the answer, obviously, is no, they're equally dubious. In others, quite a few reviews engaged with the question asked by Adam Hirsch, again in the US, in his article for the New Republic. The question that he asked was that, should we be concerned with German popular culture products manipulate history to show the exception rather than the rule in stories about World War II? And then a question repeated by many reviewers or commentators: can Germany tell exceptional stories set in World War II, like the countless ones produced in the US? Can Germany show Operation Barbarossa with the same film language used to describe, say, Operation Markengarten in A Bridge Too Far? And to my surprise, a high number of reviews felt that no, Germany doesn't yet have the right to present World War II to the world in those terms. What can be said at the end of this overview of transnational reviews, responses to Generation War is that despite the use of standard narrative devices, the telenovela with which I started, there are many other factors that influence how a product like Generation War is received. These have to do with historical difficult past, as well as present concerns about the role of Germany. As the review for the Art Desk, British publication, aptly summed up, in Germany, Generation War is seen as part of the healing process. In countries that were on the receiving end of Nazi ambitions, sympathy for characters wearing Nazi uniforms might take longer to earn. And this fact, tested in the reception of a significant product like Generation War, shows that despite the use of familiar and transnational narrative tropes, we are in reality far from having deployed a continent-wide shared memory of the war, even 70 years after the events. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Emiliano. I will now hold back my own questions because I'm sure that there will be some from the audience. So we might start with opening the discussion. Please. Okay, the microphone is coming.
One is for Dr. Horváth. I was not familiar or aware of the films you mentioned. They seem very interesting. However, I know about Peter Forgács's documentaries about the Holocaust, particularly the Danube Exodus and Free Fall. And I was wondering whether you could comment a little bit on their reception in Hungary, because I know there were some controversies surrounding them, especially the Danube Exodus, which speaks about the transport of Slovak and Austrian Jews to the Black Sea and the transport of Bessarabian Germans back to the Third Reich. And these two events seem to be put on the same pedestal, so to say, and I know this caused a little bit of controversy, and I would like you to comment on that for my personal curiosity. The other question is for our colleague from Prague. I know that there are many widely acclaimed Czech films about the Holocaust, such as Diamonds of the Night or The Long Journey or Divided We Fall, and I was wondering whether you know if any of these were ever shown on Czech television, and what was the way in which they were received by the public or by the critics. Thank you.
I suggest to collect, so please, Karl.
Well, my question is to Mrs. Sladovníková. I'm sorry she did not mention the Czechoslovak picture film, The Shop on the Main Street, which was an extraordinary film, but of course it was not about Czechs, but about Slovaks, which were part of Czechoslovakia, if I'm not mistaken. So could you tell us something about the reception of this film in Czechoslovakia?
Okay. So over there, please.
Yeah, thank you for your papers. My name is Ines Kölsch from the Wiesenthal Institute, and I have a comment and a question for the first two papers because they fit very well together, and it's my personal interest much more about the socialist films. I think what Rita told us about the importance of existentialism, I think it also is important for the Czechoslovak context. As you have mentioned, or as Rita have mentioned, in most cases, I think the films could be read, and you also mentioned it, Šárka, not only about the Holocaust, but much more about the individual in modern society, and which turned or turns into a totalitarian regime. Of course, I'm not happy with this term. So it maybe also is one reason why there were so many films made in the 1960s, because you could also read it in another way, not only about the experience of the Holocaust. And the question to you, Šárka, is, and it also goes about in the direction with the first question about the reception, or if the films were shown in TV, and you didn't really differentiate between TV production and film production, and you mentioned just 2 TV productions, one in the first in the 1958 and 1970s. Were there any other TV productions in the 1960s? And does it, if not, does it have to do with the different importance of filmmakers and writers in the cultural liberalization of Czechoslovakia in the 1960s and the TV? So what is the role of TV in the Czechoslovak culture in the 1960s? This is my question. Thank you.
Are you ready to take some more questions, or shall we do a first round? In order not to get...
At least for me.
Okay, so let's have a first round of answers. I'm aware that there are still some questions. No problem, we have time.
Okay. I hope I got everything. Thank you very much for the questions. Of course, Shop on the Main Street is a marvelous movie. It's wonderful. It received Oscar. I didn't mention it because I wanted to compare the things made by some different writers, made by different directors. As you've seen, the first 2 were made. The books written by the same writer. The second 2 were made by the same director, and the novellas were written by the same writer. And the other 2 were again by the same author and by the same director. That's why I picked these 6. I didn't also mention Shop on the Mainstream because it not only takes place at Slovakia. It doesn't really take place in a Czech part of the Czechoslovakia at that time, and it narrates slightly different topics that I wanted to mention, but it is very important in the context of the morality, in the context of evil in the common citizen. This one that's totally fits in the views about things being narrated in the films of the 1960s, about evil in the common people, and also that everything what you do is suppressed and ends by death. In that time, the reception. What I found interesting about the reception of Shop on the Mainstream when it got Oscar, I think nobody at that time really knew in Czechoslovakia because, of course, today Oscars, that's an amazing show for a whole world. But at that time, I saw only one little picture in a journal about a filmography with a very little caption that this film received an Oscar, with of course the performers being very happy on the photograph, but the reception of such wonderful thing happening for the Czechoslovak movie wasn't really mentioned in the newspapers, as it was shot also in the 60s, and at that time America wasn't really a friend of Czechoslovakia. The reception of the films in the 60s, they were not streamed in Czechoslovakia television, as far as I know. Also, the technology wasn't that good in Czechoslovakia at that time. It was streamed mainly in the cinemas, and sometimes it didn't have really happy ending, as I mentioned in the case of Alfred Radok, who actually had to emigrate in 1968, and a couple of other directors also emigrated after 1968, after the so-called normalization. You mentioned the protest against the Stalinist and post-Stalinist regime in the films of 1960s. That definitely is a very important issue in the films of this decade, because I really think that people were looking on these films, trying to find as many actual information about the regime as they possibly could. In the film Romeo and Juliet in Darkness from 1959, I think it is very visible this paralyzing fear from everything, paralyzing fear from prison and from the regime. I read in one interview that if directors in the 60s wanted to do a movie about present, they actually had to make movie from the past, because they couldn't do any official critique against the Stalinist and post-Stalinist regime. And I think that Jewishness as a topic was really suppressed during the 50s and during the 70s and 80s. And during this time, the role of the television was the entertaining one, I should say, not the intellectual type entertainment, as was, for example, in the radio broadcasting that was from the beginning, from 1923, aimed to be intellectual. Then it went wrong. But television from its beginning was a propagandistic television of the communist regime and entertaining device, I would say. Does this cover all the questions? I hope yes.
So maybe Rita?
Thank you. I'd rather not comment on that. It's later. It's a later period, and I didn't research it, and I don't feel comfortable to. I'm sorry, but we can talk about it.
Okay. So let's have a second round. Bella, please. Okay.
Just quickly, because it's a critique. I don't think, Rita, you can analyze these two TV dramas without ever mentioning 1956 and the situation in 1961 in Hungary, which is a terror regime. And I think all you told about the two movies must be put into contextualized with the situation in Hungary, all the dignity, prostitution, everything. I think I always heard the story that these protagonists are telling us the story about Hungary in 1961. Maybe I'm wrong, but it was missing from me. And also to Šárka, I think the question for me is that Czechoslovak television is highly innovative in the 70s. I mean, we have all these series which Czechoslovakia, the normalized Czechoslovakia, succeeds to sell to the West. I mean, this is this cashier woman and the house, whatever this is, this hospital. And the question is why Czechoslovak TV does not have this innovative potential on everything what has to do with Czechoslovak history. And has it to do with the normalization process that it's kind of taboo to talk about it, and for that reason, innovation goes in a completely other field? It's a question for me. And finally, to Emiliano, Perra, I'm surprised that you don't get any question, because I thought everybody's going to discuss Unsere Väter, Unsere Mütter. But I think the reason is that we were bombarded with it. And the problem is, I think, that you don't have a counterpart. I would be really interested in a lecture on the reception in Poland, in Israel, and let's say in all the countries which were deoccupied, which were the really victims of Nazism. So I'm sorry, it was very interesting, but I also don't have any question to it, because I completely agree with what you said, so I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you.
Shall we collect one more?
We can.
Okay, so please, the colleague in the last row.
Okay, so I mean, Rita, you asked us what we thought about the excerpt you showed, and I mean, for me, it evokes very much something of Tadeusz Kantor, and the Polish playwright. Okay, and that brings my question. I was wondering, and the question is for you and for Šárka. To what extent did the Holocaust as topic produce a new aesthetic in cinema, if it did? I mean, and how can you describe the relation to cinema in the 60s? I mean, we will just limit ourselves maybe to the 60s, because for Šárka that will be very difficult if we go to the 70s, 80s, and so on. And I would like also to extend the question to Emiliano. And I was wondering also to what extent the Holocaust is challenging the format of telenovela. And you mentioned the fact that there are common features between, for instance, Un Village Français and this series in Italy. Could you describe this a bit more?
Okay, I was asked by the panel to have the answers now, and then we will go to the other group. Okay, it relates, please. Go ahead.
So first question is for Emiliano. So thank you for showing us the reviews or the reception in a number of countries. And in a way you focused mostly on, or you mentioned it already, or said it, or even that it's based on historical ground, you said. I mean, a lot of this criticism is based on historical ground, but you also mentioned this question of what kind of memory does it shape in a way. And I have to say, well, I'm very critical of Unsere Mütter, Unsere Väter. And what struck me at the time when I watched it was, let's say, other questions. And there is one, or I would like to ask you, if these topics were also part of the reviews. One is about gender, question of gender, because if you look at the 5 protagonists, you would see that, well, the boys are victims of the circumstances of the war, you could say, but the women are the ones who believe in the Nazi ideology, or who, you know, become a whore because of they want to have a career and things like that. So I'm wondering if questions of gender are also part of the reviews or the reception that you studied. And the other thing is that I found it also very interesting, like questions of style, because in a way, you know, the camera resembles, for example, Spielberg's, what was the film called? Saving Private Ryan, for example, like the camera, handheld camera and all these things. And what this kind of camera work does is that you have a different engagement with characters because it affects you, emotional, you are close to the character, you say they also use point of views of a number of characters. So I was also wondering if in the reviews there is a differentiation between to who or to which characters we feel closer than to others. So these are really questions of style, you could say. And my other question goes to Rita, and it's also a comment on your question, or maybe an answer of your, well, more comment, I guess. I'm curious, because I don't know anything about Hungarian television. I'm curious at what time television was invented. So is it really new? I mean, when did television start? What kind of technology did they use at the time? Because, well, I don't know the television shows you talked about, but from the image that you showed, it felt like these were not realist. I mean, they didn't go for realism. They, I think, worked a lot with close-ups and dialogues and all these things. And the image that you showed, or the sequence that you showed, reminded me just like, you know, early television dramas on Dutch television, for example, because this was the only way how you could frame these kinds of situations. So, I mean, I know I have a lot of Dutch television dramas that look the same, so it's not related to the Holocaust in that sense, but it's related to television technology. So I'm curious, you know, what did television in Hungary at that time have already videotape recording to pre-record these things? And yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a round of answers now before it gets too much.
Can I start?
Okay.
Sorry. To Bill, I would like to answer that yes, that's it was missing on purpose because it might have been part of the politics around giving the international prizes to Hungarian productions, but as far as the 56, anything about 56 is belongs to the competing narrative set. It's just the other story. They were perceived, and I think more and more perceived as competing narratives. They are not, for very, very few artists around the political changes in 89 and a little bit before and a little bit after, they put together these two kinds of historical traumas and narratives, but mostly they are kept extremely separate. And I think that issue should be addressed, actually. How, again, it's all about missing things, absences that feel like presences, and 56 as a competing narrative set, it actually plays into this very well. But thank you, because it just so. But about the politics surrounding the prices, it must have been part of it. There is no question about that. The television technique, yes, it was very new, and it was the beginnings of television. And I don't know much about the technical stuff, but it was not pre-recorded, it was live, or they just started to pre-record. So it was a mixture of the two with very large, steady machinery, and your observation that it was not meant to be realistic. It was not, and the excerpt which I showed, it definitely it is not defined by the technique. It is defined by the technique, of course, but it is defined, I think, also by what is defined by the technique, that it had to be a closed space, it had to be the lighting and everything. But the unreal part of it, it's intentional, and it has to do with Holocaust aesthetics, which is, I think, developing very, very rapidly at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. As Bella said, you're totally right. There had been many TV series made in the 70s and the 80s in the co-production of Eastern Germany, for example. As far as I know, a lot of these were made for export to the countries of Eastern Bloc. That's also why I think that the topic of Jewishness was suppressed, and these TV series mainly was like fairy tales, all these entertaining kind of stuff. About the aesthetics of the Holocaust, I still think they are trying to work on it. It still hadn't developed. I was thinking how to put it in practice, the actual suppressing of the Jewish topics in a Czechoslovak cinematography, and I found two, for example, one film from 1960s, The Transport from Paradise, that takes place in Theresienstadt ghetto, the entire movie. So it's regularly has to be full of Jews. But when the director, before he started shooting the film, he was said by the government that he can't hire actors who actually look like Jews, which was really funny. In the 70s, Juraj Herz shot a movie about, he tried to do it about a journalist, Milana Jesenska, but he had to do it about communist journalist Jožka Jaburková, and it all takes place in a concentration camp, but there is no Jew, like nobody at all, because he was said that he can make a film based on his own experience in a concentration camp, but he can't have there can be mentioned Jews in there. So I think that's the Holocaust aesthetics in our country.
Emiliano, may I smuggle in a tiny sub-question, because it links to what Bella asked. Well, I can imagine that Polish and Hebrew is, due to language reasons, difficult, but how about the US reactions? They were very opinionated and very harsh critique, as far as I know. So how did you pick the four countries? You compare the reactions.
Okay, well, that's quickest answer is I want to look at European countries. The framework, because I am very a bit skeptical of the notion of a shared European memory of the Holocaust, and I want to look at some European countries, including two countries that were obviously for language reasons couldn't be Poland or other Eastern European countries that had an interesting relationship with the past. And I want to look at Italy and France because of the fact that they were at the same time occupied and by Germany, and there were instances of collaboration, and then the British case. So the US were more critical of the series than in general. You're right; they were quite critical of it. Again, over generalizing, but quite opinionated reception. If I can get to the question, the first one, Stephanie's question, how the Holocaust challenges the telenovela. It's a good question. In order to answer, I think I will turn the question upside down. How telenovelas challenge our perception, representation, and therefore conceptualization of the Holocaust. And I think that is something that it will happen more and more again in the future, because as a scholar working in this field, I'm getting a little tired of reading about cultural products that are made in order to be consumed by millions of people, and they are dismissed as, and this is started with Holocaust, the miniseries, as a soap opera. They're dismissed as, usually the word is soap opera. I'm not particularly concerned with the fact that they are dismissed, because in the end, it's the fact that the notion of soap opera is not conceptualized, because I really think that in this kind of post-ideological age, the emphasis on romance, and that's something that then I'll get to the role of female characters in this, is increasingly the vector through which important historical and even potentially political messages are conveyed without being overly political, because many of the characters make decisions out of, in these popular representations, base their important life-changing decisions out of strong passions. Hence the role of female characters, because in a traditional kind of gender division of kind of roles that is kind of is part and parcel of our culture, they are more inclined to be carried away by big decisions. Again, I'll get to the role of characters in Generation War, because it is interesting. En Village Français, Il Peccato della Vergogna, and these other products, they share precisely that. The fact that for some characters, one of the engines of big decisions is passion, is love or betrayal. En Village Français is a much more accomplished product, because we have that, and we have that, for example, in the figure of off the top of my head, I'm not sure I remember the names, Hortense, and then the Jewish, it might be Esther, the Jewish maid that becomes lover with the lover of the one of the central figures, and that kind of makes him, concurs in him changing his views about what, to all intents and purposes, is collaboration for a number of reasons. So there's that. En Village Français is more accomplished because we also have figures that challenge this, again, this relatively stereotype, again, gender division of roles, because we have a female leader of the resistance who puts politics, political choices, political organizations ahead of anything else, including relationships. So, En Village Français is more interesting, but it also has elements of that. Il Peccato della Vergogna is more of a very poorly made, cheap, let's call it soap opera because it has many elements of that. It really is something that is, and it's something that doesn't really ask any questions about the past, in which really the Holocaust, and that's another significant development, is that the Holocaust is used as an historic backdrop. It was mentioned by someone yesterday in a paper, the idea of having the Holocaust as a historical backdrop, nothing more than that. It really is the same way in which kind of sword and sandal films were made in the 60s about ancient Greece or Rome. And that is something that is, in a way, it's interesting, maybe perhaps even a bit worrying. So now, because of all this, because of this emphasis on passion, and the role of female characters is becoming important in these productions. In Dresden and the Flight, the Flucht, they are the ones who make the right choices because of their passions. So because obviously viewers, I mean, at least the expectation is that viewers are not interested in political choices. The big decisions are made by female characters because of their passion, and then they kind of systematize it in a way that is by giving kind of very clear political messages that anyone can understand. In Dresden, there's an episode in which, during the bombing of Dresden, her fiancé, who's more like a Nazi, says, "Well, this is them," referring to the British. And she replies by saying, "No, this is us. We brought this upon ourselves." And then there's the child, which so there's all that. In Generation War, I agree with you. I think it's a step back from this point of view, because they are the ones who, it's perhaps even worse than that. They are the ones who make the worst choices in a way. It's even worse in the sense that in some cases they don't even make them knowingly or willingly. Like it's not like Charlotte is a Nazi. She's just she's not even particularly anti-Semitic. She just subscribes to a worldview that she hasn't really reflected upon. And the same for she wants to have a career. Although it must be said that she also engages with this Gestapo officer in the first instance as a way of providing Victor with a. So there's also an element of, but then she develops in a. So I think it's in a way it's a step back, and I agree with you. And I think really that the gender division of roles in what are the characters that drive the narrative would be an increasingly important aspect of this type of productions. When it comes to, and then I'll be done in a minute, Saving Private Ryan, identification with the viewers, it was praised. One of the reasons why the miniseries was praised by reviewers, including the ones who were critical, was that it was very well made, and the reference to it was shot like Saving Private Ryan was a clear point of reference. To the best of my knowledge, no many reviewers, even the critical ones, dwelt on the fact that because of the way it was shot, it made you identify with the Wehrmacht soldiers while they're being shot at. It was accepted as part of in the end, the narrative that is about our fathers or mothers. The critical points were others. But yes, Saving Private Ryan was quite often mentioned as an important point of reference. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let's have a last round over here. Thank you for your patience, for waiting.
I have a question to Šárka. In Germany, the series A Piece of Sky was very important. It is the autobiography of a Polish child, of a Polish girl, but since German TV makers couldn't enter in the 1980s to Poland, they made a series both in Munich and also in Czechoslovakia with a, I think, famous Czech actress. It was like Dana Vavovnova or something like that. I wonder, do you know something about the series and the reception of the series in Czech Republic, or don't you think it was broadcasted?
I'm sorry, I must say I don't know much about it.
Okay, so I'll come back to you later. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Yes. Oh, you're hiding back there. Sorry, I didn't see the raised hand.
I have a question for Emiliano Perra about the format of what you called the miniseries or telenovela. I wonder how it was shown in France, Britain, and Italy, because in the US it was actually not shown in the format of a miniseries, but as one long film. And I do believe that it affects really the perception and with that the reception of those films. And I also think because it's shown in a different format, that you might have to revise your idea of telenovela because of different cuts and because of this different format.
It's a fair point about no, it is a fair point because the seriality is part and parcel of the telenovela genre. It was. And you're right about the fact that it was broadcast in different versions instead of the 3 episodes. For example, in Italy, it was shown in 2 episodes, which means that there were some cuts in order to make it to a sizable, to a length that was deemed appropriate. It is a fair point. I will take it on board. And so that affected. Probably they also affected the reviews. Some reviews mentioned the fact that it was a format different from the original one. So there was a level of awareness. Yeah. Thank you.
I also think that the changed title might actually have raised different expectations. With the title as Generation War, actually you are not expecting necessarily a film about the Holocaust or Nazism. You expect really a film about World War II. And that in turn again affects really the reception in the press and criticism. You actually mentioned at one point that one of the criticisms were that the four protagonists were depicted as victims of war and not of Nazism. But you know, we have to qualify and contextualize those criticisms. Was this really in the context of the film being shown under its title Generation War, or shown under its title Unsere Mütter, Unsere Väter?
There was full awareness of the original title and also of the reasons why international distribution. Obviously, you can't distribute internationally something that is it's not our mothers and fathers. So that. I don't see that as a key factor, because there was a clear awareness on all reviews of what was the original title, why was distributed, and obviously the title in which was the international distribution and the reasons why it was changed. So I think expectations were not so much of seeing a film about or a product about Second World War, clearly not about the Holocaust. But the expectation was fully to see a product about World War II, a German product about World War II, seen from the point of view of German soldiers and also German Germans. So I think that did not change expectations that much. I forgot to take note of the first point that you made, that in this last question,
to the criticism really that you mentioned, and that's the criticism that extended to the film depicting those protagonists as victims of war and not victims of Nazism, and that you need to see this into the context of, you know, how has the film been promoted as a war film or as a Holocaust or Nazi film?
It's certainly not as a Holocaust film, because that would have been misleading. The Holocaust is really very marginal to this narrative, and there's no one had a problem with that, per se. I should have probably phrased it differently, because instead of saying that the reviewers took issue with the miniseries presents the 5 protagonist characters as victims of war rather than of Nazism, I should have phrased it in a way that says like victims of exclusively of war and completely untouched by Nazism. So the point that I was making wasn't that they were victims of Nazism, and reviewers did not think in those terms, but reviewers really were, the negative ones were struck by the fact that really Nazism doesn't seem to be a factor at all in shaping this personality. So yeah, thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that point. Thank you.
I have one last question for Šárka, if I may. Then we will have the lunch break. Because as I said, I'm analyzing memorial museums. One of them is Terezin Memorial, and the other is the Museum of Slovak National Uprising in Banska Bystrica. And in both of them, in the early 60s, in the catalogs, in the guidebooks, we have severe anti-imperialism, and in Terezin even anti-Semitic parts of the guidebook. And then in 1967-68, they for the first time discuss adding the Holocaust to their exhibitions. And then normalization, the so-called normalization comes, and everything is blown off and goes into a big anti-Zionist discussion. So are there in the film sector also those ups and downs in the 60s? Because it's usually called the liberalization phase, but for the museum part it's not so clear, because it starts off in the early 60s in a very repressive manner, and that's how it ends also in the 1960s. So what's the point when it comes to film and TV?
I think what's very strange about the films made also in 60s that they are trying to look as if they are not about Jews at all. Because as you mentioned, the topic was really suppressed, and even as I told you about the transport from Paradise taking place at Theresienstadt, which were not supposed to have any Jewish-like actors. And also the Antoni Moskalik, who shot Dita Sachs, said that it's not about Jews, it's about like all people. That, but I think that they were really, the directors themselves, they were trying to make films about Jews and about the Holocaust, but if dealing with the official government, they had to pretend that it's about something else, for example, I should say. As for the Romeo and Juliet and Darkness, it's about like people coping with the fear and the terrifying situation of the assassination of Reinhard Heydrich and martial law. And these films definitely are trying not to be about Holocaust, the films from the 60s, because they couldn't.
Okay. So then I would like, first of all, to thank the panelists, then to thank the one who turned on the heating, that helped us very much. And then also thank you, dear audience, for your eager participation. Now let's have a lunch break, and please be on time on 2 p.m. back here so that we can...
Just we start 14 o'clock sharp. We don't make any academic quarter, so 2 o'clock so we can continue.
Thank you.